Hey friends. Um it's a Sunday morning and it seems an interesting pattern that frequently on Sunday mornings I'll wake up and I'm kind of softer. Somehow it's almost as though things have a deeper impression on me. They're able to sort of, it's like my heart is more open or something. I get more of an impression from the world, from the energies that I'm tuning into and whatnot. And so this morning, it's interesting because I was doing a physical routine, and it was like I could feel. I've heard this expression, or I've heard it talked about by, and I forget where I read this, but I've heard it talked about by yogis that in the course of a single breath, in breath and out breath, they it's like their experience or their consciousness reaches out all the way to the edge of the universe and back in the space of a single breath, in the space of every breath. And there's a kind of contraction and then an expansion, and a contraction and an expansion. And I was feeling that a little bit in my practice this morning. It's like I was noticing my habit, which is to stay in the contraction and not really fully release, which I've known this for years. But I was able to kind of get a sense, of at least a brief sense, that there's an expansion available, there's an ease available. And I think, that's important. Being in, especially a lot of what I reflect on right now is the effect that I have on Elise, on my daughter. And what my consciousness is doing is so much what hers is doing. And so when I sense tension in her, or I see a holding on in her, then I try to diagnose myself first, because that's usually the place to look. That's usually where it's coming from. I mean, or Katie, the two of us are the ones who have the most. We got a direct line. And, but the other thing that was kind of showing up this morning is something that came up at the end. And I know that I'm really curious to keep listening to The Scandal of God. But this came up at the end of the previous book that I read, which was all about narrative and making meaning through narrative. And they were quoting somebody. This is interesting because the book was in German, but they were quoting somebody who I believe wrote in English. And then it had been translated from English into German. But they were talking about what they were saying, and I forget how they got here, but they were saying something about how the only thing we owe each other is honor, or respect. The German word they used, Ehre, could be translated kind of either way. But I like the word honor, because it has a slightly deeper dimension to it. It somehow hooks into a deeper part of ourselves when we talk about honor and giving honor to everyone and everything. And I love the formulation that honor is all we owe each other. There's nothing, we don't owe, it was a question. It was kind of this question. They were searching for, like, what can we say is the foundation of our community. And the notion that honor is something that is, we love to talk, especially in America, about our inalienable rights. But that conversation gets pretty sloppy, because I think that we think some things are rights that are not rights at all. Other things that really we could be approaching more as our rights are not making the cut. They're considered privileges or luxuries, or just unnecessary. But so the notion that honor is the foundation, that mutually bestowed honor is the foundation of effective community, I found really compelling, and I found really a really beautiful perspective. It reminds me, I used to work with a teacher who talked about how in the Vedanta tradition, love is considered the natural in-between. So what that means is that love is the natural resonance between consciousnesses. And so, if, for example, in human consciousness, when we see another person, it's like that first moment of our eyes meeting, that moment is a moment of love, or at least it's if we're in our natural place, it's the natural in between. What, of course, happens is we all get cluttered up with thoughts and patterns and habits and prejudices and all of our karma, essentially. And we're bringing a lot of that into interaction. So when our eyes meet another human being's eyes, God knows what the in-between is going to be on any given day or any given moment, because we are cluttered up. But in our natural state, if we are in touch with our most authentic self and place, then love will be the natural in between. And I think, this is something I certainly could relate to it as my experience. It's when I'm in that place and I meet someone on the street, it's an immediate natural recognition of we're not talking about romantic love, but we're talking about love as the inherent outpouring of consciousness in the world. And this notion that honor is what we owe each other, it's the only thing we owe each other unconditionally, right? I feel like that's kind of, it's almost saying the same thing in another way, but potentially in a way that is a little more employable in sort of creating a principle for community, because love, I mean, I think there's love thy neighbor. That's a that's a long-standing principle, not necessarily one that we always uphold, but what I think, again, I'm this is my Sunday morning softness, I guess. But that's something that I intend to kind of carry consciously into my day, and imagine what that could do. Just imagine what that could do if we truly ran the world that way. If we really actually organized our systems around that. I mean, can we imagine the power if we put all the power of all human systems, human thinking, human technology behind that? Who knows what kind of a world we could be living in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 100 years. It's not a bad personal principle either. That's what's showing up this morning, folks. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you. Have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow.